Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Welcome to Let's Talk. I am Dr. Anita Raja, and like every week, this week we have a very interesting topic just for you so we can discuss this on our live show. If you want to be part of this show, it is extremely easy. You can WhatsApp us your questions. Our numbers are on your screen, 075-858-35150, or you could call us in on 019-24231-083. Our topic for today is gender-based violence and bullying. Now, the question is, what is gender-based violence? Gender-based violence is violence that is usually due to your gender, mostly against women. Why do people suffer from gender-based violence? What is it? How does it affect us? All these questions we're going to ask our lovely expert today, who is Professor Parveen Ali. Professor Parveen Ali is a nursing and gender-based violence specialist. She is a professor at the Health Sciences School, University of Sheffield, Doncaster, Bassetlaw Teaching Hospital, and she has a vast experience behind her. There's so many things that we were going to talk about. She has many publications under her belt. Welcome to our show, Professor Parveen Ali. How are you?
I am good, thank you. And thank you for inviting me and having me on the show.
No, it is our pleasure, absolutely. I mean, I was going through the papers that you have written, and I was just wondering how I'm going to ask you all these questions just within 30 minutes. I think we need a longer session with you if we have to cover all these topics. So first of all, I would want to ask you something about yourself. The most important question is, how did you actually get interested in such a pressing issue?
So that goes back to around 2000, 99, 2000, when I was a student, an undergraduate student in Pakistan doing BSc nursing. And at that time, I think I chose for one of my assignment, I wanted to look at gender-based violence and domestic abuse and trying to find, what the issue is. And I figured out that a lot of studies, especially about Pakistan, would say that, it is 99% prevalent, 98% sexual abuse, psychological abuse, and that sort of stuff. And that got me intrigued because when I thought that when I look around the people who I work with or families who I see, it's not that talked about. So how come that percentage is so high in academic papers, but you don't necessarily see it that much when you look around and people don't really talk about it? And I think that's how I started getting interested into the topic. And once you start dwelling into it, start learning more about it, and then you understand how grave the problem is. And I think from then onwards, it's just continued during studies. And then when it was time to do my PhD studies, at that time, I decided to focus on this issue and try to explore it a bit more in detail, especially looking at how is it that it is defined differently in various different cultures, and why the same kind of definitions from Western countries or the questionnaires which are there, are they relevant to all different settings or are they not? So yeah, so that's how I started getting interested into it. And as I progressed into it, so I'm a nurse by background, so I think you try and then relate this to healthcare services, that how do we serve people who we serve? What is our role in terms of supporting people who are who have been exposed to domestic abuse or gender-based violence, and what is it that we can do? And I think then it just spirals up and you kind of, keep working on issues one after the other.
Yeah, I agree. And looking at all the work that you have published, it certainly feels like you have really been engrossed with your work and you've actually quite enjoyed it. Professor Parveen, you did mention that it is very different in different cultures, and you did look at the questionnaires, and that intrigued you to ask that one pressing question. And the question is it really relevant to people from different communities, or is it just for Caucasian people when it comes to the questionnaires that have been designed? So when you started looking into this, in terms of different cultures, what did you see, especially within the South Asian community?
So if you look at the prevalence around domestic abuse and try and figure out generally all across the world, it is about 33%. So 1 in 3 women you would find that are experiencing some kind of abuse or would experience some kind of abuse in their life. Most of the perpetrators are people who they already know. So they are family members, they are men, majority of them. So that percentage doesn't really change regardless of which settings you're talking about. So in some places it is a little bit less in developed countries, and in developing countries it would be a bit, but on average it is about 1 in 3 women if you look across. We can't say that South Asian communities or any particular community is more at risk of being exposed to it than any other communities, but certainly there are different barriers when you are trying to access support from health and social care services. Certainly there are different barriers when you want to talk about the issue and how it is perceived by the community, by the individuals, by the social groups that you are living in. So I think there are those differences, but there's no country in the world where it doesn't happen. There's no ethnicity in the world where it doesn't happen. There's no religion in the world in which it doesn't happen. It is prevalent all across the globe. And I think one of the very distressing thing was that I have got a Future Learn course, which is about supporting victims of domestic abuse. We launched it in November 2019. And so far we've got about 20,000 students from all across the world, from various different parts of the world. And it's so disturbing to see that the kind of issues that women experience, regardless of where they are, they could be in a very developed country like Canada or America or any of those kind of places, or they could be living in a very small village somewhere. And it's quite disturbing to see that issues that women experience are pretty much same. The same kind of fears, the same kind of issues, the same kind of, so it doesn't really change where you are. And that's quite it's stressing, as I said.
No, definitely. But in terms of support, would you think that, in countries like, for instance, the United Kingdom, there is a lot of awareness, at least, or at least we try and talk about, domestic violence, domestic abuse. Whereas if we compare it to third world countries, for instance, I'm a half Pakistani, originally my dad's from Pakistan. You yourself are from Pakistan. Over there still, I think there is a bit of a taboo when it comes to cultural acceptance of domestic violence, or would you disagree with that?
It is a taboo everywhere, and I agree. There are services, and the implementation of law is different in different countries. If you talk about UK, so you have got laws implemented, which then means that people are able to talk about it. They're able to access services. They're able to have support available for them once they have started talking about it. And I think in Pakistan, while we do have laws, they're not implemented as such. We don't have places which support women to get out of the abusive relationship and start their life afresh in other ways. There are lots of pressures from families and from community groups, and because a lot of those times domestic abuse or things that come under domestic abuse are just seen as kind of a normal thing, and people don't necessarily talk about it or just accept it. Now, we also need to remember that there is very small and very a fine line between when something you think, this is a normal behavior, and when something is abusive. So a lot of those times people don't necessarily recognize those behaviors that, these are abusive, or we use the name of culture, or we use under the name of religion or different practices, or this is how we do it. That's what we say, and therefore the acceptance is there. I think culture, religion, where we are, what laws are implemented, what services are available. Do people talk about it? Do people don't talk about it? Attitudes that they have towards women, generally speaking, attitudes they have about abuse, about violence, all that has an implication of how domestic abuse is seen in a society and how prevalent that is, and what do we do about it once we start looking into it.
I mean, you've done so much work, and it is such an irony that women are still the most vulnerable when it comes to domestic violence, domestic abuse, despite all the progress we've made in terms of life, world, science, in every area, every field. What do we need to do differently so that we can break free from these shackles?
I think there is not one single intervention which is kind of just cure the whole thing, because even if you when you start looking into what causes it and what are the explanations of it, you will see that researchers over kind of decades have tried to explore various different things, and it turns out to be that there are various factors at various different levels, starting off from individual level, like how do we think about how do we solve conflicts, what do we think about conflicts or issues that we have, what do we believe in, how do we talk about that, do we resort to violence, do we resort to just talking about it in a calm way, what kind of communication skills we have. So starting off from very individual sort of skills or individual habits that you have, then you can look into the family related aspect, like what structure is financial contribution, other financial situation of a place, we're talking about community, how community reacts to abuse. So there are various different levels at various different stages that needs to be tackled with. And I think the easiest or the most important thing is that started to talk about it and start to talk to kind of not to accept it, start to understand when, especially when women, if they are saying that they are being abused, so believing them and not questioning them, not telling them that what you're saying probably is not abuse, this is what this is how you are thinking about it. So that, I think, is the starting point. And once we start talking about those things, once we start discussing about those things, I think everything else then follows, because then you develop kind of strategies which then help you prevent those issues. Then you develop laws and other sort of things that would help you tackle the issues and take that forward. But somewhere where we need to start, I think, it's talking about it and realizing that when people are saying, they're not just making it up.
Definitely. And I think that is the most important thing for someone who is actually experiencing domestic violence and domestic abuse. Viewers, our topic for today is domestic violence. If you want to be part of it, you have to stay with us. Our number is on your screens. It is very easy, but it is time for a break. Welcome back to Let's Talk. Before we went on to the break, we were discussing with lovely Professor Parveen Ali the pressing topic of gender-based violence and bullying. She has done a lot of work in this field, published loads and loads of papers, and she is very knowledgeable. And we could not have found a better guest to shine some light on this very difficult and yet taboo issue. Professor Parveen, before we went on to the break, we were talking about how we could change the way we perceive gender-based violence and how we could help and change the environment around it. Now, I see that you've done lots of work around this. There's one question I do want to ask you. What leads to intimate partner violence, gender-based violence? How do we end up in this position?
So when we talk about gender-based violence, there are obviously various different forms and various different aspects that we talk about. And intimate partner violence, which means that abuse within two intimate partners, usually if we talk about Muslim world or South Asian, it's usually like husband and wife, or if we talk about UK, it's people who are living as partners. So that's the type of violence we are talking about. Now, your question as to why it happens, as I said earlier, researchers have tried to explore that issue for quite a long time. And there are different theories that people started talking about. So for instance, there is this thing about that, if people get some kind of head injury or any of those biological changes into their brain, does that causes them to be violent? There are discussions about that, there is a lot that talked about alcohol and that its relationship with abusive behavior. Is that what causes it? So it is about, is it about attachment issues? Is it about kind of socialization and how we learn about it? And I think when you look at all those different perspectives, what you realize is there's no one, you can't pinpoint one particular single problem. So as I said earlier, it is sort of a very complex picture, and if we want to deal with it, we have to start off at all various different levels. We need to work with individuals to be able to understand how they react to conflicts and issues which they have. How do they manage their anger? How do they talk about and resolve issues when they come across various different problems? How do they see relationships? What does relationship mean to them? If you look at South Asian context in many of those places, if things like, for example, corporal punishment, which happens in school or in madrasas, and if this is what you've learned, that if any time if there is a conflict, the way to learn about is that to shut the other people, to not to talk about it, that's going to have a negative impact on the person, and they might think, well, this is the only way to deal with it. If your family in which you are living in many countries which are developing countries, if there are no laws which are that significant, the role of families become very, very important. And if you are telling women to just accept what's been happening to them, and if you are telling men that they have to behave the way they behave to their wives, if they are abusive, that's fine, that's not a problem. How you see women, how you see them, kind of issues which they are saying. So all of those various different things needs to be discussed, needs to be explored. How does community see abusive issues around that? How do we talk about how women are treated when they're walking in the streets? What laws we have, how those laws are implemented if people are sort of there are issues when something happens, if a woman is killed or something like that, how quickly that person who has done is brought to justice. So I think there is you're coming back to the question that you have, that what causes it. I think it goes back to the thing how women are seen and how they are treated. If women are perceived as a property, as not individuals, then we just accept what's happening to them. And that probably is the biggest explanation. But what causes it? There are things at each level of the society which contributes to it and which we need to tackle if we want to change the situation.
In terms of mental health problems, is that one of the many reasons why people are violent? Because you see, of course, there is a cultural impact. And as you've rightly said, it's the way we are taught to perceive things, the respect we give women, the way if a woman puts in a complaint or talks about something, the seriousity of the situation and the way the people around her take it seriously. But do you think that mental health perhaps also has a role in this?
Mental health issues, depending on if you are saying that mental health issues causes people to be violent, well, maybe for some people it may cause them to be violent. But if they are only violent with their wives or with their partners and not with other people, would you think it is the mental health issues which is causing them to be violent? Because if that was the issue, they would have been behaving similar way with other people as well, isn't it? But if your question is, does domestic abuse causes mental health issues? So definitely it does, because it increases the risk of depression, anxiety. It may kind of, make people end up killing themselves, like going for suicide, homicide related issues. We see all the time things about, honor-based violence where people are killed for various different reasons. So there are many different issues. But again, coming back to your question, does mental health causes abuse? Yes. And the answer is the same. Like, if that person is abusive to everybody, then perhaps we may be able to say that, yes, it does. But if it is only with their partner, can you then say that it is because they have got mental health issues? Why that mental health issue doesn't really play up when we are talking to other people? So I think it's it's a mixture of various different things, but it comes back to power and control, how
Definitely.
women are seen, and how accepted abuse is in a society.
Mm. No, it's you've answered it very beautifully, and I think you're the first one who's actually said no. You cannot hide under the label of mental health. You definitely need to be answerable for what you're doing, and if it's just your partner that is being subjected to abuse, then certainly mental health may not be the reason why you're doing it. I wanted to ask you about the DVA game video. This is something that you have been actively involved with. So could you tell us the purpose of this game video and how it can help people?
So I am quite, I believe on sort of, developing interactive strategies which help people learn, which engages them and helps them kind of learn through practicing, because I'm an educator, as you know. So these are translation to knowledge kind of strategies which I've used. So what you learn from research, how can then you convert that learning into practical aspects which people can then use and improve their learning about. So that was the intention behind it. And it's not a video game thing. What it is that so there are two aspects. One is the Future Learned course, which is an interactive online course, talks about, I started that course and developed that course thinking about healthcare professionals. Having said that, that's been used by lawyers, that's been used by social workers, that's been used by people who are concerned about somebody else in their family or their neighborhood about domestic abuse and how do they help them. So it just gives them information as to how do you kind of react, what can you do to help somebody. And even sometimes people who are experiencing abuse, it also helps them, because most of the time people don't really realize what they're experiencing is abuse, because they may blame themselves thinking, oh my god, it's my fault and that's why it's happening. So that's one course which has helped quite a lot of people. The other thing is the interactive board game, which is a game in which basically it's a way to make people talk. Because you see, if you stand up in a class and give a lecture, you will bore people kind of in 20 minutes time. Usual attention span is about 20 minutes. You can't really engage anyone any longer than that. Whereas with this sort of game, what happens that it is about a very serious issues, but it makes people reflect on their experiences, people who they have provided support to, people who they have seen in their life. So they keep on discussing and exploring various different aspects around the issue of domestic abuse and what it, how they should have reacted to it, or what was the issues going on in a particular situation. So it helps them talk about it. It helps them explore that aspect. So what I've seen in my practice, that you can actually keep students and healthcare professionals or anybody who is doing that training busy quite nicely for about 2 hours or more than 2 hours. And that then just tells them that, you know, awareness about their own attitudes about domestic abuse and what they think and what the actual issue, learning and other aspects does improve. So that's what it is all about. And now we are in the process of changing that board game into a digital game, because the board game was developed just before COVID and we were using it in classrooms and other places. And then COVID came, and therefore then we realized that maybe if we could turn that into a digital game, it will probably have much more applicability, where we can use with different people who are supporting victims of abuse, or anyone who would like to learn about domestic abuse and, you know, how it makes people feel and how can we support them.
Okay, and Professor Parveen Ali, which was the end of our show. In the end, very quickly, what is your giveaway message for today?
My giveaway message today is that we do need to understand, what do we think about domestic abuse? How do we see women in the world? How do we think that, you know, what place they have in the society and how should they be treated? And I think if we are very, very clear about that, and if we have spent some time thinking about this, that how do I like my mum to be treated? How do I like my wife to be treated, my sister to be treated? What do I think about it? What do I think about women? I think that would help, because then that makes you aware of your own attitudes, your own prejudice, your own thinking about various different things. And I think usually we think about ourselves that I am not, like, you would see a lot of people say, I am not this and I don't think like that. But and therefore we never get the time to reflect on our own situations. And therefore nothing changes in the world. So if we are aware of our own attitudes and behaviors and thoughts and feelings about something, I think that goes a long way than changing behaviors with others and doing something about issues that we encounter.
Thank you so much, Professor Parveen Ali. It was an absolute delight to have you on our show. Viewers, we have discussed gender-based violence and bullying today on our show, and the giveaway message is, if you see anyone in this situation, you need to put yourself in that situation and ask yourself, would you like your mom or sister to be in that situation? It's time for us to say bye. We hope to see you again soon. Allah Hafiz.